And we're live.
All right. Hi, everyone. We are on time today. So we are here with Deandra Pup and myself, Tim Von Rieden, and we are with ConceptCookie.com. This is our weekly Wednesday live stream, and today I'm going to be talking about working without Lineart. So I'm just doing my last post here on all the social networking. Then we're going to get started. All right. So while I'm doing that, I just want you guys to know that there are many, many different ways you can go about working on your stuff. And you kind of have to find which journey, which path works best for you. And this is one that seems to work rather well for me, at least for me to feel comfortable and actually enjoy the process of creating art. So today I'm going to be talking about working without line art, but that's not to say that you shouldn't work without line art too. Like for you, you might be really strong with line art, and you could go further down and study like line weighting and what different lines mean and what you can do to build and improve on those. But for me, I just really enjoy shading and coloring, and that's why I kind of took it out of my entire process. Because for me, it was actually wasting time. And you kind of want to become as efficient as an artist as you possibly can. So with that, now that I'm all ready to go, Deandra, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, so welcome everyone to this live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m., and that's Central Time, and it's -5 GMT if you're outside of the States. And as always, if you have any questions, even if they don't pertain to what I'm working on particularly, it could just be about digital art, questions you have about industry, or anything you may just want to know. Feel free to ask them in the Q&A section, and Deandra will be making sure to find them and kind of feed them to me as we go through the stream. So with that, why don't I just go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen, or at least my canvas. So this is what I just did this morning as like a quick marketing thing. But I just wanted to show you guys, like, you don't need to rely on line art. For me, I work heavily with shapes initially, and then it becomes more of like a refinement from there on. So what I'm going to do, let's see here. I think I'm going to push these in the corner, make them a tad smaller. And let's just build them up. I think I might even do the same face just so you guys can kind of see what I did. And then, as always, I'll save it on different layers so that as we go through this, you guys can see the progress made on each. Okay, there we go. I'll make this larger so you guys can see it. Okay, so to get started, I'm also going to be working, not technically in grayscale, but it's pretty much the same thing. I'm going to be working with this brown color. And this is something I do a lot too, where I start off with maybe just one isolated color, and then I'll use the different values and use that. Because since I have my opacity on, if I pick up a new color, now I'm working with this color. So you can still get your blending kind of done, and a lot of people use grayscale right from the start, and they add color later. This is more or less to show you guys the essence of what this live stream is trying to teach, which is not using line art. So I'm going to be using just this color, and that's kind of my explanation of why I'm using just an isolated color for this. So there's a few ways that I can go ahead and get started. The first is I could generally make some blocking out of the shapes, and this is usually something that's done in like life drawing if you're looking at it and you're trying to get the scale and proportion of what you're working on. Actually, that's a little larger than what I want to be doing. You know what? I think I'm going to hide that bottom bar as well. There we go. Does it look pretty good on your side, D? Okay, here you go.
Yeah.
All right, so then this is one way. Now I'm not using line art. I want to be very specific. I'm purely working with like the idea of shape language. I'm trying to get those forms down. So I'll do the same kind of thing where it's over the shoulder. Now with this generally blacked in, that's where then I'll probably go in and I'll start laying out my base color. Or not even my base color. This is literally just trying to create recognizable shapes that you can build off of. And I think the biggest thing that I would say most young artists struggle with is just having that confidence of being able to work quickly and just trusting yourself that it will look okay. Because then from here, I'll generally lay out, okay, well, this is where one of the eye sockets will go. The other one will be somewhere in that general area. Since the nose is kind of getting lost, I'm going to pick up with the eyedropper tool, which is Alt on a Mac and on a PC, I believe. And I'll just lighten up the area around the nose so that becomes more pronounced. The cheeks would be catching more of that light. So a lot of it is looking at lighting and how your values contrast up against each other. And that's what gives the impression of form and shape. So a lot of the times when I'm doing this right from the get-go, well, I always got to make sure I'm flipping my canvas. That's something I don't do enough. But don't feel afraid if it doesn't look good within like the first 10 minutes even, or even the first half hour sometimes. If this is a piece that you're going to be working on for an extended period of time, then don't feel like it has to look perfect all the way throughout. Even immediately, I think the chin is too long, but I know in the back of my mind I can fix that later on. Just focus on what needs to be done at the very moment. Because I don't want to be skipping steps either, because then I'll get lost in working on stuff that's like detailing phase, and that's more of a waste of time at this current stage. See, the forehead needs to be jutted out, so I'm going to grab that darker color, push out this shape here, and then I'll grab that lighter color and then fill it in, almost right up to the edge. Like that. You can see how it filled it out just a tad more. Oops, I gotta make sure I'm making new layers throughout this, like I promised I would. So now, where this color right here, I'm gonna grab somewhere in the middle, and I'm gonna bring that down into the neck area. My brush size bigger. Because when I'm working this far into like the beginning stage, I need to be working with larger brushes. I'm not worrying about detailing or polishing, because you gotta save that for the end. And that's another thing where don't jump the gun. You know, really make your foundation look great. You can worry about the polish and detailing stuff later on.
All right, are you ready for your first question?
Yeah.
Okay, from Primarily Blue. Hey Tim, do you need a stylus with a spring in order to paint better? Because mine doesn't have one, and blending colors for me seems messy.
No. Actually, I don't even work with that one anymore. I had to buy a new pen for my tablet, so I have one of just the standard tablet pens. So no, you don't need it for blending. If anything, just be very conscious of how much pressure you're putting down on the tablet. And if you really need to, go to your system, well, if you're on a Mac, you go to your system preferences, or even on a PC, you just find where your tablet settings are, and then you might change the what's called the tip feel. You either want it to be more soft or firm. So if you're having a problem with blending, try making it probably more firm. So that way you might be pushing down too hard on the tablet, and this will allow you to kind of blend easier without the color being so pronounced when you work.
And there are brushes for that too, I think.
Oh yeah, and like if you're really having trouble with just blending in general, try using a softer brush or use a texture brush. Use something where it doesn't have hard edges, because oftentimes then when you're like even right now, like I can blend this just because, well, I mean for me this actually looks pretty much what I wanted it to in terms of the blending, but it is a little trickier. But I think since I've done it so many times, I kind of know how to do it. But usually I would rely on like a skin brush or something that does have a little texture and the outline wouldn't be so pronounced. So I would just recommend maybe try using that kind of a brush.
Alright. And then from Benedict Geierhofer. I'm working on a piece without lines currently, but the scales in the picture give me trouble. Can you draw how to draw faraway scales without lines? Only one or two, so I can see the basic idea and integrate it into my piece.
Is he talking like creature scales?
I would assume so, yeah.
I guess this isn't even something I've ever done. But usually what I see, I usually watch RJ Palmer's live streams. He's the one that does the realistic Pokemon. And usually he has like a couple brushes. So let me see which ones I have in my stock. So like this is an example of like a scale brush that you can use on repeat. So it would look something like this. And this is what I would consider one of the tire mark brushes because it looks like it could mark. So if I would do it far away, you can do that. And then the way that he blends it together is he usually keeps the edge more soft so that it isn't such a hard brush or a hard edge. So maybe try doing that. But if you're doing individually, that is very time consuming, and I would try to find some kind of a brush to make that process go by faster. But if you're really dedicated on like no, I want to make sure I'm using just like a basic brush or something like that, then I would keep it very much not making lines so much. So let me see the best I can do this. Mind you, I've never done this before. This is based on the knowledge I do know of creature scales. So what I would do is I would have a darker backdrop like the one we have here. And for each individual scale, I would lighten it near the tip, and then kind of have just like a soft gradient going down. And then I would do that over and over again. Or I would just copy one. This is what I'd probably do. I would just copy and paste one that I felt was really well done, and I would work it through. Now, if you're going to get into an area where it's bending, that's where maybe something like this would work better, where you're drawing them individually. But don't strain yourself. Like, don't kill yourself over doing scales, because I see a lot of artists try to do that, where they try to detail every single scale. But I think the best thing that you can do is try to look for a way to make that process easier for you. So something like this. And I think if I blended it maybe a bit better. But like this and fur, I mean, it's a lot of repetitious brush movements, and I think that it just comes down to muscle memory. So just keep practicing over and over again. It's kind of like the same reason why I feel so comfortable with drawing people, just because that's literally most of the time what I'm drawing all the time. So just over time, you find little tips and quality stuff that you can carry over into your next piece. And the more that you do that, you just have all this knowledge that you're carrying with you from piece to piece.
All right. Next we have from the Emily. I'm assuming you're working on a tablet with a stylus, but although slower, can you draw with a mouse, and how severe are the disadvantages?
I can tell you right now, I cannot draw with a mouse. And it actually makes me cringe a little bit to think of doing that, because you can't get your, where I rely on that so heavily for blending that I give a lot of credit to those that can do it with mouse, but unfortunately I feel like I am not one of those that are confident with just a mouse. So what I would consider a severe disadvantage, and I think just in general, just for our industry, it would be a considered disadvantage. So if this is something you're really passionate about, I really would look into purchasing a tablet.
For me, it feels almost like you're trying to draw with like your left hand, and you're not left-handed.
Yeah, it's a severe disadvantage, I would say.
Alright. And next, from Diana Chris. Hey Tim, I was wondering if you've ever worked on a Cintiq 24HD. The college I'm applying to has a room full of them. I've noticed that when people work on them, they tend to improve quite a bit in a shorter span of time. Should I save up for my own?
You know, this is a difficult question to answer, because I personally feel that if you become comfortable with a tablet and you become really good with it, I think there really is no difference between the tablet and the Cintiq, because then you overcame that 3-month hump of becoming used to the hand-eye coordination. And I think with Cintiq, it is an easier learning curve. Like you can definitely transition from traditional to digital a lot easier. But for me, I have a Cintiq. I don't even use it. I stick with my normal tablet, and a lot of that is because the Cintiq that I got, the 13 HD, has just a lot of problems with it. So if you do end up saving money for Cintiq, really look into the one that you're purchasing. Really look at like customer reports and see if there's a lot of like complaints. But I'm pretty sure the larger ones are the ones that do work really well, and there have been definitely more minimal complaints compared to the smaller one. But don't feel like you absolutely need it to become a better artist. While I do think it is easier if you want to transition from digital to, or I don't feel like I'm at a disadvantage because I'm using a tablet.
From Kupo, hi, how do you manage to stay on one zoom level? I have a problem with constantly zooming in and out.
Oh man, I'm right there with you. When I was in school, all I would be doing is this all day. I think I learned just for efficiency, I learned to tone it back. And also, just for saving time, just test yourself. Try staying zoomed out for the entire piece on one of them. Now, I kind of had to learn to do that because of when I got out of college, I had to do tutorials right away. And during tutorials, you can't constantly be like zooming in and out and like repositioning your canvas because in the viewer, especially if it's a time lapse, it just becomes disorienting. So I think it was one of those subtle things that I had to pick up, and I'm so grateful I did. So now I can tell you, just stay zoomed out on a piece, and I think you'll realize how much more you can get done in the amount of time that you have with staying zoomed out. And then near the end is usually when I'll zoom in, but that I usually save for very, very end, like when I'm doing my polish pass. So it might seem really weird at first, but trust me, you'll save a lot of time if you can transition.
Here's a good one by Shauna Bass. Usually I start with a lighter gray color as my base, and then I end up with a very flat face that lacks contrast. Is it better to start with a darker midtone, and if so, how do you portray fair skin without losing form? My fair skin faces are just so flat.
That is a good question because I think lately I've appreciated less contrast now. And I think before I was all about contrast, but I almost enjoy the subtlety in contrast. So if you're trying to not lose your faces from looking flat, really look at the, and I don't want to sound annoying repeating this word, but look at the nuances in the way that you're isolating your highlights. So like, as you can see here, I haven't even really added any highlights. I've been doing just very subtle value shifts. And this stuff I like doing more than the heavy shadow or highlights. So I'm going to make a new layer to show this. So once I get a little more comfortable and further with the piece, then I'll go in and start doing my highlights. Now I kind of have certain areas that I like to touch up on with highlights. It'll usually be when their eyes are closed, I usually like to have a few on the eyelids. If they were open, you can definitely have fun putting highlights on the eyes themselves. But like for this particular piece, we're going to keep it toned down. Then maybe a few on the cheek. Maybe give myself some guidelines to work from, and then maybe way up here on the forehead. I mean, you gotta keep it consistent though. That's something that I always try to re-emphasize is when you add a light, you got to make sure that it's consistent throughout the entire piece because that might throw off your viewer if they're looking at it. And it looks like the lighting, you have like a few different lights hitting the face when you were trying to represent maybe only one. So let me go ahead. So then usually I like to blend it in. So I'll usually go through this process where I lay out my idea, my general kind of idea where I want these highlights. then I'll blend them in, and then I'll do one more pass on top of it to really, really emphasize these highlights that I'm adding. And then once I'm done explaining that, then I'll show you guys what this looks like when I turn the layer off. And I think you'll be able to notice that the change with adding these highlights. Because don't feel like you have to have this really heavy contrast. A lot of it does come down to the color you use too. Maybe on the inside of the nostril here, just a touch. Now, like I said, I usually like to keep this more toward the polishing pass. Let me go ahead and turn that layer on and off. So you can see the difference that that makes. It's one of those subtle things that you add near the end, usually, but you don't want to get lost in it, because I think it's a quick way to add form, and I think that's why artists feel the need to like add it as soon as possible. But I've learned over the years, really build up your base and your foundation first, because then when you add your polish pass, you're going to be polishing something that's already so well made and done that if you rush it, sometimes it's like you're trying to use it as a crutch to give the look of form and shape. And that you don't want to use your highlights as a crutch. You want it to be more of a highlight. Actually, that's a good way to describe it. You want to use your highlights as a way to highlight what you already have underneath. So just kind of keep that in mind while you're adding your light sources.
Okay, from Primarily Blue. How did you learn how the shadows of a face work when painting?
This is something that I've just kind of gathered over time, and I think a lot of reference photo, like if you, I remember for a long time it was hard for me to draw lips, and I didn't understand, like, I always thought it had to be like two, pretty well defined hard edge shapes. But then over time I've been learning, like even the bottom lip, for instance, sometimes some of the skin color bleeds into the lip on the corner. And this is kind of what I'm talking about in the workshop that I'm running right now, is you have to be able to see it. You're developing that visual eye. So that's why you might not see it at first, and that's why there's usually a struggle when you're trying to execute it on your own. But then as you do it over and over again, you kind of learn things like, oh, I guess the skin color does kind of bleed into the bottom lip. And then you add that to your inventory of knowledge. And the more that you have, the greater that your pieces will be. And a lot of it just comes down to you seeing it in the first place.
The next question is, what is the best way to learn to draw humans without having to look at a bunch of pictures of naked people?
In all honesty, I would say life drawing was the most beneficial for me in learning to draw just anatomy in general, and even proportion. So I don't think you should disregard it as just drawing a bunch of pictures of naked people, unless if you're just doing it like on your own, like if you don't have a class. Then I would say really it comes down to a lot of practicing. Well, for me, it was a lot of profile drawings, like even something like this. Like I would consider this more of a practice. And this, I'm not really working off of reference. So I'm really my memory banks of like, okay, I need to know like where the different muscles would go, how the different shapes of the face would lie next to each other, stuff like that. So this is almost more or less of a, not so much a study as it is more of like a testing my abilities. So if you really want to improve your skill level, I would definitely have reference open and looking at it and really analyzing your reference and trying to recreate that the best you can on your own piece.
I would also add to that you kind of just have to, suck it up and get comfortable with looking at naked people, because if you want to like learn how to draw a cat, you're not going to put like a blanket over it or like a shirt. If you want to know like how their form works and what cats actually look like, you have to like just draw it as it is.
It's very true.
Okay, from Savage Shoe. What's your favorite thing about art, or what keeps you going? Is it the process of making something, the idea generation, or sitting back and looking at a finished piece saying, wow, I made that?
Man, I would say it comes down to a lot. Most of what you said, yes. I think a lot of the times it's experimenting with color. That really excites me. Blending is really fun for me. And then definitely a finished product. But it used to be, and I would say in college especially, it used to be posting it online and just seeing the interaction I would get between likes or comments or even like DeviantArt. And it didn't until I was like a year out of college that it's very unhealthy. You shouldn't be doing work for other people. Well, yes, it's nice to hear the approval of, your coworkers and your friends, whatever. But oftentimes I would find myself posting it or like making it just to get that feedback. And I think that's not healthy, because then you lose sight of what you're enjoying while you're working. And it shouldn't be about pleasing others. It should be about, kind of pleasing yourself. So I would say nowadays it's more or less the process that I really enjoy, so much more so than actually posting it online and seeing what people think.
Alright, our next question is, have either of you done any painting in Sketchbook Pro? I seem to have a hard time blending unless I use the airbrush and then erase to have a hard line to keep form, and I was wondering if it's just me not knowing the program well enough.
I've used Sketchbook twice ever, and I thought it was a pretty good software. I will say I still haven't found one that I feel blends better than Photoshop, so that's why I stick to it. Otherwise, I would have switched probably to Mischief or even Krita, but I think I still love the way that Photoshop blends in the user, uh, the functionality that I have. The only thing that really bothers me about Photoshop is you don't have that line smoothing ability. But Deandra, have you ever used Sketchbook Pro?
No. Well, I mean, like the mobile version, but not really, no.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would say Photoshop is always like the safe way to go for blending.
Although I will say that it's the first time I've heard someone say they haven't been able to blend well, so it might just be your settings. I would try messing with it a little bit before you just give it up, and then see if any of the setting editing helps you before.
Did you ever do anything else other than concept art, like animation or game design, to test yourself or experiment on new things?
Yes. For while I was in school, I know I feel like I repeat this every week, but when I was in school, I went to school for game art and design, and they only taught 3D. So technically my background is in 3D art. Like even my degree is mainly for 3D design. So I came out of school not wanting to do 3D, and I really wanted to draw. So that's kind of why I followed this path. But let me see if I can find. I can show you. I should have it somewhere. I can show you maybe one of my 3D models that I did while I was in school. And then animation, yep, I had to do 3D animation. And then while I was in school, I got an internship. And it was a game, that was a pixel game, and I had to learn how to animate in Photoshop. So I've also done a few pixel animation stuff as well. Let me see if I can find this 3D folder here. There we go. Okay. So while I was in school, this is one of the models I did. This was of the character that I was kind of talking about last week. So this is Crystal. Actually, I can pull. So this is my drawing of Crystal that I did last year. So then while I was in school, the one thing I really did like about 3D art is I loved painting the textures. So like all of this was mostly painted on. Like there's a few specular maps in it, but for the most part, that's what I really like to do. And actually, where's my final version? There we go. So in that, I mean, this was the final version 3D model that I did. And even though I don't really do 3D anymore, I learned a lot while I was doing 3D art. I learned a lot about seeing your character in a 3D space, really understanding lighting. I think that was a big thing that I'm really glad I did 3D for. And even understanding things like ambient shadows, these kind of stuff that I wouldn't have known, or even specular, like all these terminology that I wouldn't have known if I didn't go through 3D background. Let me take Crystal out of here. So yeah, I think it's good to kind of dabble in other fields of our industry and to really find out like what one you're super passionate about and then just stick with it.
From Kylie Kennington, hey guys, when I work I don't really use any line art. Do you think this is an advantage or disadvantage? I'm going into game art and design and want to draw characters. Or is it more of a choice of how to draw and doesn't really matter?
I agree with the latter, where it doesn't really matter. It also kind of depends on what industry or what company you work for. Where like some animation studios almost require you to start in line art stuff first, but then other studios, like a lot of game ones, don't require line art. So I mean, it kind of depends on the company you're searching out for as well. But just know, for the most part, if you can create awesome work, I mean, the art director or whoever doesn't care how you got to that stage for the most, as long as you're not just taking Google images and drawing over it. Besides that, they really don't care about your process. If you're doing it in a timely manner, they really don't care if you're starting in line art or you're going straight into color.
Mm-hmm. As long as you get your point across, I think it's fine.
I'm wondering if I should do the ear too. Will I have time? Yeah, I'll do the ear.
You have half hour more.
Okay.
From Yoko Weaver, do you work background to foreground or the other way around? If you were to turn this sketch into a portrait, how would you handle taking it to a finished image, as in the transparency of the paint you're laying down now with the color that would be behind it?
Since this is all on its own layer, I could make a new layer underneath of it. Let me grab a really weird color so you can see it. Then I would literally just lay it underneath. Now you can see where some of that green is pouring through on the skin. Actually, I kind of like it in some areas, but what I would do then is I'd make a new layer above that green layer, grab my white, and then just fill it in like this. So that way the green isn't spilling into the image. But for the most part, depending on what I'm doing, like for this, I'll usually keep it on its own layer, but if I'm doing a full-blown illustration, I tend to work on a single layer. And I'm not saying that that's a good habit to get into, that's just something that I do. And I would say, if I was trying to add a background to this, that'd probably be the best way I would go about doing it. So yeah, I would just make a new layer underneath of this. Because when I erase the edges, I'm not using white to edge it out. I'm literally using my eraser tool to edge it.
If you're doing like an illustration, do you like lay down the background first? Or like at least sketch it out and then add characters or something?
I can show you actually. So last week, League of Legends had or Riot I should say, had its own contest, and I entered, and this was like a full-blown illustration. So this is how I started it. So I know it might be kind of hard to see, But pretty much I lay out just a bunch of base colors that give me a general idea of what I want the scene to look like. Now I wish I had what I did before this, because before this I just did a quick line sketch, and then even on paper I did just a few sketches to get the idea down. But then I take that and I pretty much just develop it, and I render, and then I finally get to this. So it's a lot of just reworking, but when I start off, I try to lay down my foundation as quick as I can. Because if I went into this and I was trying to do things individually, like if I was like, I'm gonna, oops, that's a really low quality picture there. If I went into this thinking I'm gonna go through and like individualize everything, so like every leaf I would take the time to do. No, you almost have to find ways of making it more time efficient. So then, like the leaves just started off as like a bunch of random fast scribbles, and then when I get into the refining, that's when I'll tone it down. But even when I'm doing the scribbles and the fast stuff, I'm still keeping it in control. So even though it's scribbling, it's like controlled scribbling, where everything that you're putting down has a sense and a reason behind it. You're not just randomly adding things. So yeah, I would lay down the very, very backdrop first and then work from background to foreground. I think that's what you were asking.
All right, from Sophia. I'm going to be life drawing for the first time tomorrow. Any tips on how to work with line and shadow, and possibly how not to get how not to get embarrassed? I'm doing this with my college and I'm not too sure what to expect.
I think everyone's first time going to the life drawing class, they're just a little nervous just because, it's a new experience and something that, you can't really prepare for it, I guess. The best thing that you can do is just not be uncomfortable. And I know that sounds really easy to say, but go in there and just know everyone's feeling a little awkward. It's their first time, but it's not an awkward thing. You have to treat it more as this is a study, and this is for me to develop my skills to learn anatomy. So I think when you take it more into more of a professional mindset, then the embarrassment does melt away.
Mm-hmm.
And then what was the other part on the...
How to work with line and shadow.
Oh, I would say keep your shadows be more thicker lines, and then even where like a lot of light is, like don't feel like you always have to edge out the entire face. I remember one of the greatest things I learned while I was in life drawing is you don't need, like if I was drawing a sketch of a face, I was only allowed to use line art. You don't have to completely draw, like fill in the shape line. You can leave spaces empty and then kind of pick up that line later. It was one of those things where that sense of OCD that I always had, it just melted away. Like that one was easy for me to let go because I was like, oh, I can see how much better that can look when I'm not focusing on laying out line to represent my light and shadow everywhere. Sometimes light can be represented by not adding anything, which I think is something that you should think about. And yeah, the whole thing about being embarrassed, just don't even get embarrassed. It's a professional setting.
I would say, like, even think of yourself as, like, like Michelangelo or something. He would, like, as a professional artist, looking at, like, a model or, like, a sculpture, like, you're just analyzing. You're not, like, don't even, like, think of them as, like, a person. Is what I would say. That's how I kind of get over it.
Don't avoid drawing everything.
No.
Oh, no, I'm just saying to the student, not you.
Okay.
No, like, the people that would avoid drawing, like, the boob area or the crotch area, like, that's when it does become embarrassing.
Yeah. So even if you're not cool with it, just pretend that you're cool with it, and you'll get through, and you'll get used to it. And I would also say for, like, lines, one problem that I know that most people have when they first start is just, like, outlining. They just outline the outside of the body when that doesn't really give you, like, an accurate portrayal of, like, human anatomy. You want to draw you want to focus actually more, I would say, on the inside, like what's going on, like the creases on the body, and like actually make it look like something that could be round in like 3D. Outlining it just like makes it super flat. And that's something that a lot of people do. So just as a warning, once you're aware of it, I think it helps a lot too.
I think that's a lot of what digital art is in general, of just having those moments of like you realize something, you're able to apply that to your work from that point forward. And the more of those moments you have, the better of an artist you'll be.
Just things finally clicking. That's the best.
But it won't happen all at once. I think there's too many beginners that like think, oh, I've been drawing for a year, why can't I get any better? Where it kind of sucks to hear, but a lot of the times it takes years, and I'm talking like years and years, like a good 3 years before you're really feeling with your work. But that's not meant to discourage at the same time.
Go ahead.
I don't want to like, when I just heard it in my head, I was like, well, that sounds really discouraging. But it's supposed to be encouraging, because then you know if you're not getting it right away, that it does take time. It literally just takes time. And the more that you practice and if you put in the hard work, you will become a good artist. So yeah, I didn't mean to discourage people when I said that.
Okay, next question by Jack Vulture. I own Photoshop, but I find it clunky to use as a painting program. I now use Krita, which isn't perfect but feels more catered to painters. Do you think not using industry standard programs could make it hard to find a job, especially on site ones?
No. Oftentimes they'll just let you use whatever software you're most comfortable with. It's kind of like what we were saying earlier. As long as you get the work done, they really don't care. They really don't. Because then they're getting what they want out of you, and you're still getting what you want to create the piece.
Whatever helps you paint, really. I don't think anyone could be against.
Exactly. And if they hired you because they like your style, they like your talent, so they're going to accommodate to you as the artist.
Okay, from Jordan Morehouse. What are some of your favorite drawing exercises? My studios are all 3D modeling or wood/metal shop this semester, so most of my sketching is during lectures or between classes, and I find myself falling into a bit of a rut.
Just drawing exercises in general?
Yeah, practicing how to draw candy or something, or any of the exercises we have in the site.
He's talking concept cookie specific. I mean, there's definitely a few that I would consider my favorites. I would say the candy is a good one just because it has so much underlying fundamental learning values. But if you're just talking in general, you kind of have to figure out your own path and what you like drawing. So for me, when I was in class or had breaks, I would draw people, I would draw profiles, and I would just do it over and over again. So if you find yourself where you're like trying to figure out what to draw what you like and draw it a lot. Because then eventually, if you want a career doing what you like, you'll have the portfolio to do so because you have this collection of sketches and final pieces that kind of showcase what your main interest is. But yeah, but if you are talking concept cookie, I would definitely recommend the drawing candy one.
Alright. From Diana Chris again. So I'm going into animation next year, and I'm wondering what my plan for my future even is. I know I want to be in a studio for animated shows or movies, but I love illustration as well. Would concept art in an animation studio be a good middle ground?
Maybe. This might be one of those things where you have to just test it and run with it. Where, yeah, apply for an animation studio, and then when you get there, kind of feel out what you enjoy doing best. If, like, you do something for a couple months and you're like, I'm really not feeling this, I'm not happy with my work, and I feel like I'm not being utilized, then yeah, I would move on to something else. Because a lot of it just comes down to what are you most passionate about, and then follow that. But if you're still not sure exactly what would be the best fit, then you do have to kind of experiment just a bit. And since I've never worked in an animation studio before, I can't really give my own experience with that.
Okay, next from Primarily Blue. Do you use the brush tool to line art? If another tool, what are the advantages and disadvantages?
Do I use the brush tool to line art?
For line art. If another tool, what advantage? So I guess like the pencil tool or something.
Oh no, yeah, I use the brush tool. I'm not very comfortable using the pencil tool. Or anything that's very vector, I'm very not comfortable. Or I would even probably try to do it in Illustrator, to be completely honest.
From Benedict, what is your opinion that sometimes it's better to create less polished and simpler stuff as concepts of a game than highly detailed and complex stuff? Or is it important to polish it up and it will be downgraded in-game?
So this is a discussion me and my friends have a lot, where if it's concept art, it's not supposed to be highly detailed and complex. Like then you fall into illustration, and often that is like the marketing side of things, where I really love illustration, where I don't even really consider myself a concept artist, I consider myself an illustrator. So when you're doing concept art pieces, don't feel like you have to develop them or make them look crazy detailed, because that's not what a concept artist is supposed to do. They're supposed to literally think of concepts and get that idea down on paper as fast as they can. And then usually they'll pass that concept off to an illustrator and they'll take it from there. So I guess if you're working for, so I think their example is a video game, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
You could even look at like League of Legends, which has really beautiful illustration pieces, but their in-game 3D models aren't nearly as nice. And I think a lot of it is because the illustrations are supposed to kind of sell the idea, and then the in-game model is just supposed to get the general gist of what the character looks like, what they're wearing. So I don't think it's necessary to highly polish for concept art, but if you're doing illustration, then yes, it is a must.
It almost could be both, because I know like Zeronis, like the initial concepting, of course, is really super sketchy, but then like once you kind of nail it down to the final design, you can kind of incorporate more like detail and kind of make it an illustration, because Zeronis has like character sheets that are really like well done.
Oh yeah, I almost think it's because he had the time to do it.
Yeah.
Where usually concept artists don't have like extra time to polish things up.
It's not expected though, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely looks better. But yeah.
If it does come into the picture, it's only like at the very end, either for like marketing or, you know, just like the final design.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. Do you think still life is helpful? Also, any tips on teaching your mind's eye to see 2D objects, characters, etc. as a 3D plane?
All right, say the first question.
Do you think still life is helpful?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think really studying. But here's the difference. I think if you're just observing it and drawing it, I think that's where you're not learning anything. But if you're looking at an object and you're not only observing it, but you're analyzing it, that's a whole nother thing. Because when you analyze an object, you're really kind of breaking it down to everything. So like I even use this example in my workshop of if you look at a flower pot with some flowers in it, a normal person would observe the flower pot and be like, oh, that's a pretty pot of flowers. But then the artist needs to look at it and analyze it and think, okay, that pot looks like it's probably made of clay, which means it would absorb more lighting, unless if you sprinkled water on it, then you would get that specular lighting based on where the sprinkles of water would hit. Or even like the flowers themselves, like, oh, I really like the contrast between the orange and green leaves. It's probably because they're close to being a complementary color combination, or how the undersides of the leaves tend to be lighter in color than the top side of the leaves because the top are the ones that are absorbing the light. and you're really kind of critically looking at an object and breaking it down in your mind. So that's what I really want all new artists to start doing, because once you start doing that, it will heavily translate into your work, where then you're also looking at your work with a critical eye and you're able to kind of break it down. And then, sorry, what was the second question?
Any tips on teaching your mind's eye to see 2D objects as 3D?
A lot of it is just understanding lighting. Because even with this object right now, I can imagine it in a 3D space. Like if I had it on a turntable, I could kind of see it at every angle. And that's because my lighting information needs to stay pretty consistent. Now, since I don't have an actual reference and I'm not drawing from a reference, the lighting might have a few areas where it might be off, but your job as an artist is to make it look as convincing and as consistent as you possibly can throughout the entire piece. And that's kind of one of the challenges of doing concept art. But don't let that intimidate you. I say that when I really want you to look at it and be like, okay, I can do that.
Okay, from Bianca Yuki. Do you listen to songs when you are drawing? I read on Animation Survival Kit that music doesn't let you concentrate. Do you think that's true, or is it more like a personal thing?
Wow, that said that in the book?
Yeah.
That actually surprises me, where I don't think I ever not listened to music. I'm either watching something in the background, and now when I say watching, I actually mean listening to like the TV show, and every now and then I'll glance over to see what's going on. But I'm really good at not having to watch something. I can actually just listen to it and get the whole gist. Or like music, I feel like I have always on, and I honestly think that helps. That helps rather than distracts. But I have to keep the music kind of similar to what I'm working on. So something like this, I would probably listen to like something more classically sounding, where not so much like Mozart or anything. I mean, you could do that, but something that's more soft, gentle, maybe a lot of violin, cello, piano music, and I think that helps inspire me because then my mind's in that mindset. I do think sometimes if you're listening to music that's distracting, it's often because of words, or if it's really heavy and like contrasting. Where I like to listen to music that's very flowy and it makes you feel like you're floating. And that music, I think, then that way you don't have to pay attention to the music. It's more of just a background noise.
I know my figure drawing teacher actually said we weren't allowed to listen to music for like a long time because he agreed that it was a distraction. But by the end of the semester, he kind of changed his mind, or I think it's just personal preference. He said he only listens to like classical music or opera when he's drawing or painting. But I don't think it's really a hindrance. It's like up to you, and like what Tim said, what music, like it relating to the piece helps a lot.
Yeah.
It almost helps like create the mood and the scene, and like it like lets your mind like start.
Like feeds off it.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it feeds off it and works together almost. It like gets your mind going.
Mm-hmm.
From Shauna, are these streams recorded? I had a couple people at work need me to do things, and I totally missed your answer to my question on values. Go figure. One of the topics I sorely need advice on, and it's interrupted.
Yeah, these are instantly recorded and sent to YouTube. So as soon as it processes, it usually takes like, I wouldn't say a half hour, but then it should be on YouTube in about a half hour. So, I'm going to give her dark hair everywhere.
Okay, next question from D. Brown. I'm moving to Krita as well. I was using it just for liner, and when I was done with my liner, I found myself moving on to rendering without any issues, aside from getting used to Krita's brushes. I still use Photoshop, but I'll move to Krita completely soon.
Yeah.
So I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but.
Because it really just comes down to user preference, I think, is kind of what he's also confirming. But like, I feel most comfortable in Photoshop. That's not to say Photoshop is the best #1 software to use. It's just for me personally, I found it to work with my my techniques and my process.
Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of like sometimes people get hung up on, like what brushes are you using? Like what's the magic brush that'll make your painting like so much better? I think that almost applies to programs as well. Like, yeah, they're a little bit different here and there, but ultimately it just comes like you knowing what you're doing and being good at drawing or painting.
Because I feel like any artist can adjust to any software.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think it really comes down to who the artist is as a person.
The software is just like the nitty-gritty, picky preference, but not like really important, or like it's not gonna halt your progress, I don't think.
No. It's almost like the software is a tool, and the artist has to use that tool. Now, they might be handed a different tool, but they still know, the artist still knows like all the knowledge they have about like lighting and form and value and shape. They just have to get comfortable using the new tool.
Mm-hmm. Alright, we have a few questions left and then we'll end the stream at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
In a few minutes.
Alright, so if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask them now, and we will try to get through as many as we can before we cut out the stream.
From Henrique Ortega. I need to be really good to get a job as an artist. This kind of freaks me out because I'm already 27 years old and I have no experience in work with art, and it took me so long to realize that art is what I really want to do. Do you have some advice on how to get started?
I will say you are at a disadvantage, and I think it's good to hear the truth first so that you're not given just people being like, oh, if you try hard, you'll make it someday. I want you to know it will be hard. But if this really is your passion, then you really have to pump out some practice, and a lot of it, because you're competing against people that have been practicing pretty much their entire lives for the most part. So you have to play a little bit of a catch-up game here. I think what you can do now that you're older, though, which I think a lot of younger artists don't realize, is what you are passionate about drawing. So kind of figure out like what subject matter are you most intrigued by, and then follow any tutorials, do a lot of studies on that specific thing. So if it's like creatures, really delve into the world of creature concept art and learn as much as you can. And practice, practice, practice. And I'm not going to say eventually you'll get a job, because I don't like giving people that false kind of empty promise of like, oh, and eventually you'll get a job. It will be tough, and what I will tell you though is that if you stay strong, that's the best thing you can do as an artist, is not give up, because I think that's where a lot of artists kind of fall short, is they just give up because it becomes too hard.
Okay, and then the last 2 questions we have are about the same. So how do you hold your stylus? Do you sketch and paint with your elbow or wrist?
Who else asked this? This was something that I didn't even realize this was like a thing of like painting with your elbow. I have never done that ever in my life, and I don't know if it's better for your hand gesture movements, whatever it may be. And I think this applies more to actual painting, where it makes more sense when I was working on like a canvas with acrylics or something. But for digital art, the Wacom tablet that I'm using is about 4 inches tall, like the actual screen area, and it's about 6 inches wide. So I can cover the entire screen with just a movement of my wrist. So for me, it would almost seem ridiculous if I was moving my elbow all the time, where it would almost be like a workout, and I feel like it would just be tiring. So for me, I only use my wrist.
I would say that only really applies to actual painting, traditional painting, or it might be able to apply to like if you have an extremely large like Cintiq or something. because that resembles like traditional painting more than just a regular tablet. But
okay, yeah, because then you've heard it before then too.
Yeah, I have. I know they stress it a lot in like figure drawing to draw with your whole arm, but it's the space is too small and you're drawing like directly down like onto the table. So that only really can maybe work with the Cintiq if you want to get like big strokes or something, I guess. But even then. Alright.
Getting near the close, I'm going to start adding some highlights to the lips here too. Kind of everywhere. So as we enter these last few questions, that's kind of what I'm doing to end off this piece.
Any last questions? Post them now.
Oh, this is it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wonderful. So we're actually on time for one, and I'm feeling pretty good about the process we made today on the actual painting.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to thank not only everyone that came to the stream, but also those of you that are with the workshop right now. It's been kind of a joy for me to work with you guys and to really see the progress that you're making. And just know that the streams will be tomorrow for you guys at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. Or sorry, 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's tomorrow, and I will be at the CG Cookie headquarters in Illinois. So that's where I will be doing my streams from. And I think that's most of the big news. I will say, get excited for October. Halloween is probably easily my favorite holiday of the year. So I definitely have a lot planned for it. Even though I'm kind of busy with the workshop stuff right now, we have a lot of third-party artists doing tutorials for us, and we have a lot of Halloween plans. And as always, we're going to have our Halloween contest, so look forward to that. And that's kind of what's on the palette for Concept Cookie right now. So thanks again for coming today. Know that we do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m., and that's Central Time, and that's -5 GMT outside in the world. And I usually post the subject matter about an hour or two beforehand on our Facebook, DeviantArt, Twitter, and Tumblr page. So you can follow any of those, and you'll be redirected here when the stream starts. So as always, thanks again. Deandra, any last words?
Goodbye, everyone.
All right, take care, guys.